Hey, welcome to this session, everybody. I am Lori Boyer and so excited to be with you for this session. I have with us, if you have ever talked to Scott or if you've ever watched Scott, I'm sure you'll know he is a dynamic, exciting, intelligent, just fun guy. We have Scott Case here with us from the National Retail Federation. Scott, tell us a little bit, introduce your background. Who are you? Why should we care?
Very cool. Well, boy, you set high expectations now, so I'm gonna have to step up and make sure I deliver. I am Scott Case. I'm the VP for Sustainability at the National Retail Federation. So that is the world's largest trade association for retailers. So if you can think of a retailer, particularly anyone with a footprint in the United States, odds are good that they work with the National Retail Federation. And I get to play with all the cool sustainability people at these retailers, which is really, really cool, kind of the pinnacle of my career at this point, because I've done nothing but sustainability my entire career. So for me, everything is about the connections between business, human health, environmental, social, and community impact. And we get to talk about it today, right, Lori?
Yes, I am so excited. Scott, it's really kind of crazy. It's like you've been in sustainability since before sustainability was even a buzzword, even all cool that we're all talking about. How did you start your journey in sustainability? How has it led to where you are today?
Wow, that's a fun question. So, I mean, I'll give you the real quick, dirty 30-second version of it. But as a third grader, I was an asthmatic and spent an awful lot of time in hospitals struggling to breathe. And I had a third grade teacher that put a white sock on the muffler of her car. This is like 1970s.
Wow.
That white sock got so dirty so quickly. What I learned at that moment in time was that the automobiles and how they were designed and the pollution they generated were directly affecting my health. And the more you start looking at those kinds of things, you can see it absolutely everywhere. And that's where retailers are really kind of stepping in and doing things to make the world a better place because they're using the power of their business. So it's kind of fun.
That is crazy. I have to say, I've had third graders as a mom, and I don't think they would have been quite as intuitive in realizing, look, this is impacting me. So that is just so great. I love that you get to work in sustainability because I mean, that's just so great that you know that you're doing something that really can make a difference, not just today, but into the future. And so that is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be picking Scott's brain today. So as always, if anyone has questions, feel free to jump in and ask him in our Q&A. But for now, I'm going to jump in with the questions I have for Scott, and specifically around retail, since that is where you are at. Let's talk about retail. I mean, you said it's been since the 70s since you've been into sustainability. Talk to me a little bit about sustainability over the last few decades in retail. What were some of the initial kind of sustainability movements we saw? How has that evolved over time?
Ooh, I like that question. Yeah, so I got into sustainability when it was easy. If you could spell the word sustainability, you were somehow an expert.
What if it's called green?
It was green for a while. It was eco for a while, but I think sustainability is kind of the broader term. I mean, so those in the audience who are older or of my generation might remember kind of the tree hugging crunchy granola freaky stores that you might have gone to looking for health food or something like that. I mean, you can kind of say that was kind of early days. But I think true sustainability in the retail space really started popping late 90s, early 2000s, when some of the bigger retailers began to realize they could find ways to save money and generate free environmental benefits at the same time. So the early days of retail sustainability really were about things like changing the light bulbs and making the stores more energy efficient, or finding more fuel efficient vehicles to move the goods around. So they were very, very kind of simple things that had clear economic benefits and generated free environmental benefits. But as that kind of expanded And retailers really began saying, wait a minute, what else can we learn? What else can we do better if we focus on the environmental side or on the social side? And they started finding new opportunities. And so kind of modern retail, a lot of retailers have actually calculated their carbon footprints. They're looking at what decisions are they making that have contributions to issues like climate change or issues like local community concerns, local air pollution concerns. And they're finding ways to create positive environmental, social, and community benefits while still managing to make money and generate profit.
I absolutely love that you pointed out the fact that, the early 30, 40, 50 years ago, we saw the opportunity for making the profit at the same time. Honestly, sustainability, I mean, the ancient Romans had recycling practices. I'm like a history nerd, Scott. So ancient Romans, they found recycling setups in
Pompeii. Yeah.
Pompeii. They found ancient recycling centers there. In Asia, as we know, in the Chinese, they had those amazing terraced rice fields. That was because it saved more water. And all of this, though, was done not just with a view for let's save the planet, but because it made economic sense. It makes business sense.
I love that, Lori, because every aspect of this is absolutely connected to those. So you're correct. It's been recycling has existed as long as retail has existed. This whole idea of circular economy, which is kind of the latest flavor of sustainability, which is kind of combining recycling with reselling products. Those ideas have existed as long as retail has existed. And there are certainly other periods in history where I think World War II, where people literally went door to door collecting scrap fabrics, old rags, cooking grease, etc., to support the war efforts. So there have always been economic reasons to do it and resource constraint reasons to do it.
Absolutely. And one of the things you and I have talked about before, so for everyone paying attention now, there are, just as Scott was mentioning, the lights in your facility, turning things on and off, things like that. Often you may already be doing things that are sustainable practices, and you might completely not even realize or be aware of that. That's something Scott and I have chatted about. Scott, can you share maybe some examples of ways that are sustainable efforts that people may not even recognize that they're doing?
Yeah, so it's in my consulting days, particularly in the early days when people were somewhat suspect of sustainability, they'd be like, I'll never do sustainability. But as soon as you walked into a facility, walked into a retailer, you would see sustainability in practice. Yes. And it might be as simple as a sign that said, turn the lights off when you leave the room. That's sustainability. That's energy efficiency. That's reducing costs. But we would see it in lots of different places, whether it was making sure you weren't wasting packaging materials, whether you were reusing boxes of some sort, whether you were making sure you were right sizing the boxes, that you were not, in fact, using more cardboard than you needed to. There were all these kinds of things that some people thought of only as cost savings, but realized eventually, hey, wait a minute, those also have environmental benefits. And then when consumers start expressing desire to buy more sustainable products from more sustainable retailers, all of a sudden you realize you need to make sure you have a story to tell. You also need to make sure that you are asking your suppliers about their sustainability stories. Because kind of the modern sustainable retail operation, they're really recognizing that some 98% of their sustainability footprint exists in the value chain, in the supply chain. So the retailers that want to be more sustainable, they want to sell more sustainable products, what they're learning is they have to ask their suppliers about the suppliers' sustainability initiatives. And that kind of trickles its way through supply chains all the way down to the raw materials that are used.
So, Scott, let's say that you're sitting down with an executive of a retail company, many just like people here on our conference today, and they said to you, Scott, what are a couple of things I should do to get started? I want to be part of the sustainability movement. I want it to make business sense. I want to do what consumers, how do I even start? What are your recommendations for them?
Ooh, that's fun. So typically, Lori, I would then ask them a bazillion questions to kind of figure out where they are in their sustainability journey. But I think a good place to begin is to simply ask them why they are interested in sustainability. What was it that kind of triggered it? Because that will lead to some of the motivations that can lead you to discover more sustainability opportunities. Benchmarking against your competitors is always key, because it is really interesting when people think they're doing a good job, or maybe think they're not doing anything at all, to start benchmarking and realizing where they actually stand.
Okay, so one of your first things you recommend, benchmark, go out, look at the competition. Are you saying go to their websites and see what they're promoting, or how do you find out, what the competition's doing in that regard?
Yeah, so there's a great one. I can say, if you are a member of the National Retail Federation, we're certainly doing benchmarking in that space to kind of understand. But checking out the websites is absolutely one way. Walking a store, a competitor store, and just seeing what they are highlighting and promoting is another. But for retailers, ultimately, you really want to understand what your consumers are looking for. So as consumers get more and more interested in sustainability, you can realize different kinds of retailers attract different kinds of consumers who have different kinds of sustainability desires. So really understanding what your consumers are looking for is really, really important. And not just your current consumers, but maybe the consumers that you're trying to attract to expand the value of what you're offering.
Yeah, so your ideal customer, then you want to look at them. If they're a 25-year-old, what they're looking at may be very different than if it's a 75-year-old perfect target audience. Is that what you're saying?
That is a very good example. So when you look at all of the sustainability consumer data, what you will see is older generations tend to care a little bit less. Younger generations care a lot more. So then you start saying, well, who's spending the most money in the store? And that kind of demographic, that the demographic that's at the prime earning, prime spending part of their lives, is one of the most interested in sustainability considerations. The challenge is they all define sustainability slightly differently. So you have to kind of understand what they are looking for.
That's what I was going to say, Scott, because while the older generations, they may scoff a little bit at like, this is stupid. This is this new sustainability wave. But they're the same generation who are like, turn the lights off, Lori. You're killing our energy bill, right? So there's kind of a practicality. They were, a little bit more firm about, let's not just be wasteful and let's not just waste our electricity. And again, they may not recognize that as the buzzword of sustainability.
Yep. So you can actually truncate the way people think about sustainability based purely on age, at least here in the United States. The older generation does seem to think a lot about operational efficiency. Turn out the lights, use less energy, use less water. Those are very kind of operationally focused. The kind of next generation, if you will, has been very, very interested in the materials that products are made from. Is it made from recycled content? Is that organic cotton? What's the source of those materials? And then this Gen Z and Gen Alpha generations, they think about those things, but they're also very concerned about who made the product, where was it made, and what are the impacts at that factory level. So this younger generation is looking even deeper into supply chains, and they've got access to information the older generations never thought about, because on their phones, on their apps, etc., they can learn everything they want to know about who made the product, what it was made from, what the environmental impacts are, what the social impacts are, what the community impacts are, and maybe even, hey, if I buy this product, how much could I resell that product for at some point in the future?
Okay, I love that, because just yesterday, I have 2 college-age daughters, 23, 21. And one of my daughters had ordered something that had come, and the other daughter said, did you know that this company is using factories here with these workers? And my other daughter literally returned the item. And I was like, what? That is not something I would have even thought about or known about. But they really do care about what's happening out there in the world. And so I think it's so smart what you're saying. So I want to recap again so far. Number one, know what your competition is doing. Number two, know what your particular audience would expect and want from you. But you also mentioned at the very beginning, understanding your own reasons for wanting to look at sustainability. What are those different kind of reasons, and why does it make it different?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways you can kind of tackle it. It does depend. There are certain executives that are really paying attention to the investors, the investor community, and what the investors are looking for. So that can be a motivation for some. The consumer focus can be a motivation, but don't ever underestimate. Nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, "Oh, how can I make the world worse today?" Right?
Yeah.
So most retailers, most retail executives actually see themselves as the hero in their own story.
Oh, yeah.
The hero story is, hey, I am finding high quality products at affordable prices that people want to buy. And that's kind of the hero story. But as the retail executives begin to understand that every decision they make about how they run the business, about what they're selling, every decision has hidden human health, environmental, social, community impacts. Those executives begin to say, wait a minute, what can I do to make the world a better place through the business? And once executives start asking that question, they find amazing opportunities. Now, they find some opportunities that make no sense. They're too expensive, they're impractical, and it won't work. But keeping that open mind of like, wow, how can I do this? What can I do to make the world a better place and still make money? The opportunities bubble up a lot faster than people realize.
Yeah. And I think, Scott, it's really great that you mentioned that, because probably everybody here who's come, they care about sustainability. They are maybe in that mind frame of like, I do want to make a difference. I do want to embrace this. So what would you say then are the challenges that they run into? So we've got somebody here, they're excited. They're like, I really want to do these initiatives. I'd imagine getting buy-in in the company might be rough. The costs associated up front might be rough. What are the challenges retailers face?
Yeah. So the biggest, scariest, most terrifying challenge that exists, and if I could make a horror movie, it would be called Change. Because ultimately, what this is about is changing the way you think about the business, changing the way you think about products, your relationships with consumers, your relationships with your suppliers. So the biggest challenge is that most of the biggest opportunities in the sustainability space, from a money perspective or from a do-gooder kind of perspective, most of those big opportunities require collaboration across the organization and with your suppliers and sometimes with your competitors. And that kind of change requires a different executive mindset, more of a collaborative than purely competitive approach. So that kind of change can be very, very difficult. And anyone who's been in an organization of more than 3 or 4 people knows getting people to change and kind of rethink how they're doing it can be particularly challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have any tips, for getting that buy-in?
Yeah, I think the best tips really are building a very clear sustainability strategy.
Okay.
And not a strategy separate from the business strategy. So embedding a sustainability strategy within the business strategy. Because if you have identified what you are trying to accomplish and you have the key performance indicators, you know how you're going to measure, you know who's in charge of doing what, and you are successful at holding each other accountable for meeting those business goals that also happen to include sustainability goals, you can get people aligned a lot quicker. So some retailers have gone as far as baking in sustainability incentives into bonuses.
Oh, interesting.
So those kinds of things like demonstrate to the employees, to your consumers, to investors, even to regulators that you're taking these kinds of things seriously.
I love that. Do you have any other examples, maybe, of things that you've heard of retail organizations do to be successful, or any cool initiatives that you've seen?
Wow. So I think some of the initiatives I've been most fascinated with recently are really about circular retail and the circular economy. And what some retailers are beginning to figure out is I might be able to sell this jacket multiple times. So I might have bought it the first time, and the retailer might give me an incentive when I no longer want it or can't fit in it. They might say, hey, we'll give you a gift card if you return it to the store. And if you're making high quality products, they can actually resell that jacket to somebody else. And so if you watch what retailers are doing, the Amazons and Walmarts are reselling products at this point, but so are Coach and Nordstrom and others. So these are kind of a big piece of it. The other part is that retailers are beginning to make it easier for consumers to resell products that no longer needed in their closet, or to recycle products. So again, it's the idea that our consumers are looking for more sustainable options. What are all of the different ways we can make sure the consumer works with us to find the sustainability solutions they're seeking? And that covers resale, that covers refurbishing, repairing products, that covers reselling products. So this is kind of new, but growing rapidly, particularly among the Gen Z people.
Okay, so if you're out there listening and you have some sort of ability to refurbish, I love that. You know, I've bought multiple refurbished technology items. If you can resell, obviously with returns, that's huge. But that's the first I've heard of providing incentives and gift cards to send it back. That's especially if you're in some of those industries where you've got kind of timeless items that people are going to want forever. Yeah. That is so smart. What about,
that's too crazy for people, right? That something I can see people out there being like, what? And I am never going to do that. But there are other things like making more information available and easily accessible to consumers. So consumers now expect I can take my phone, I can scan a product, I can learn how is it made, what's it made from, how do I recycle it when I no longer want it? So just providing consumers with that kind of sustainability data that they're seeking and that they expect you to have is a big step forward.
Especially as you mentioned, those Gen Z, and I'm sure Gen Alpha will get even more wanting to know. I have seen some cool examples lately of ways that companies can show off that they are doing sustainable things, whether it's in your packaging, it says this is recycled materials, or, you know, I noticed Coke on their soda can said this is a recycled can. And so, and recycle me again. All of those help us know there's small, easy ways that you can let your consumers know that you're involved and that you care. Any other tips along those lines?
I mean, I love those examples, Lori. The one piece of caution I would offer is make sure you're very, very aware of the U.S. Federal Trade Commission's environmental marketing guidelines, because they do define how to avoid greenwashing. So consumers that take away a different understanding, you might have said, this is what we meant. If consumers understand it differently, you can be liable for some of that. So finding ways where you can tell a sustainability story authentically, backed up by science and data, and still in a cool, creative way that makes all the cool kids want to gather there is a key piece of it. Just make sure you're being very careful when you are marketing these things, because in the sustainability space, you can turn people off fairly quickly if you get too casual with how you talk about what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important as well for transparency. Please make sure you're very clear about what you are doing and how, you know, if you say you're doing things, make sure you really are doing those things. We don't want anyone to be accused of greenwashing.
Absolutely.
So one of the things, Scott, that kind of brought up for me is sometimes people get overwhelmed by the idea of the regulations and it feels scary and there's SOC 1 and SOC 2 and what does all this mean? Do you have any words of comfort or advice for people? Is it so scary they shouldn't jump in? How do they jump in if they're not sure?
Very cool. I think so. The regulation is something that all businesses kind of endure to a certain extent. I think the safest place to play is when you're focused on the consumers and what the consumers want, and you're focused on your business and you're focused on your investors. A lot of that demand precedes the regulatory requirements. So those that are paying close attention are actually kind of ahead of the game, particularly those that keep an eye on what's going on in Europe, because in our vastly interconnected space these days, right? My daughters are the same age as yours. They can look on TikTok or Instagram Reels or something like that, and they can say, hey, how come they can do this in Europe and we don't do it here? So some of these global expectations are spreading a lot faster than they ever have before. So understanding how you can play in that space and retain the attention of the consumer is always going to be key.
Okay. We are so already running out of time, Scott, but before we go, I think Scott and I could probably sit here for about 27 hours and barely broken the ice. But where do you see this heading in the future? Any ideas? Especially, I love how you mentioned Europe and whatnot. International shipping is booming. I guess, where do you see the future of sustainability? Any guru guesses?
There's some fun guru guesses. I've certainly got a whole lot of ones that I've missed over the years. But I think what is happening, so you mentioned retail returns. That's becoming a big piece. Like, how do retailers manage these e-commerce returns? I think what we're beginning to see is more and more hyper local solutions in the retail space. So if you're talking about what's the most efficient way to manage returns, it might be it's more efficient to find local ways to sell those products or recycle or donate those products rather than kind of recreating lengthy logistics supply chains to get them returned. When it comes to things like repair and reuse and refurbishing, those are likely to have hyper local solutions. I think the other thing is retailers are beginning to realize they don't have to sell all of the solutions. Sometimes just helping consumers understand, hey, we don't take the recycling back here. There are options over there. We're not in the business right now of selling, used products or something like that. But if you're interested, check out this local Goodwill or check out this local thrift shop. So I think the idea that you're building a relationship with your consumers, not just online, but local relationships with local consumers, and that gives you the opportunity to kind of focus on local solutions. And that's how retail began. And I think that's still the strongest part of retail.
I love that you brought that up. That works for businesses in every size and going local. That's so cool. So thank you so much for all of these comments. I want to summarize really quick a couple of the big points that stood out to me. Retailers, you got to get aware of what's going on around you. Know what your investors want. Know what your competitors are doing. Know, most importantly, what your consumers want. Create that relationship with your consumers where you're working together to try to find solutions. And as you work to meet their needs, I think things are just going to open up for you. Scott, anything I missed?
One thing I missed is a very simple concept that absolutely every retail role is a sustainability role. The sales floor clerk can influence what kind of products people are buying. The CFO, the chief marketing officer, the CEO, the logistics people, every single retail role is a sustainability role. So no matter where you are in the retail space, know that you can help make the world a better place too.
I love that. You're going to have to trademark that whole line. So Thank you again, Scott. Everyone, thank you for being here today, and just find a way to get that sustainability into your mind.
Cool. Thank you, Lori.